Francis Coleman had always appreciated the land he inherited from his grandfather. It was a vast 20-acre property, a peaceful sanctuary away from the chaos of the city where he had spent countless seasons as a child. He knew every plant, every stream, every quiet corner where he used to sit and listen to the wind whistling through the tall grass. After retiring from the military, he had planned to settle there, permanently restoring the old farmhouse, living a calm life, and keeping the land as untouched as possible. But life had different intentions. He had spent the last year traveling, visiting old friends, and taking a much-needed break. Now, as he drove up the familiar dirt road leading to his property, he felt the same sense of peace flowing to him until he saw something that made his pulse stop right where his open field should have been, where wildflowers once stretched as far as the eye could see, stood a colossal, shiny white mansion. It was an outrageous, flashy structure completely out of place in the middle of his rural land. A perfectly groomed lawn surrounded it, with a decorative fountain in the driveway and high metal gates with security cameras installed on top. It looked like something straight out of an expensive magazine, but to Francis it was nothing less than a horror. He hit the brakes and jumped out of his truck, staring in disbelief. For a long moment he simply stood there, his mind denying to accept what he was seeing. How was this even possible? This was his land. No one should have been able to construct anything here, let alone a gigantic mansion. He took a deep breath and forced himself to think rationally. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe some developer had erected on the wrong plot of land. That was the only explanation that made sense. He walked up to the gate and pressed the intercom button, his hands clenched in a fist. There was a crackle, and then a woman's voice came through, dripping with arrogance. "Yes, who is this? I should be asking you that." Francis snapped. "Who the hell are you, and what are you doing on my land?" There was a short silence, then a click, and the gate slowly shifted open. Francis rushed through before they could close again, making his way toward the house. As he approached, a woman stepped out onto the front porch. She was in her late 40s with perfectly styled blonde hair, oversized sunglasses, and a smug expression that made Francis's blood ignite. She wore a designer dress, the kind that looked ridiculously out of place on a rural property. He could tell immediately this was a Karen. She folded her arms and smirked. "I assume you must be Mr. Coleman." Francis narrowed his eyes. "And who the hell are you?" She sighed dramatically, as if she were dealing with a particularly slow child. "Karen Mitchell, I own this house, and I'd appreciate it if you didn't show up unexpectedly." Francis barked a laugh. "You own this house on my land?" Karen's expression didn't change. "I don't know what you're talking about. This land belongs to the homeowner association. I purchased it legally through the association." Francis felt his hands clench at his sides. "Homeowner association?" His voice was dangerously low now. "There is no homeowner association here. This land has never been under an homeowner association." Karen gave a theatrical sigh, as if she were dealing with someone hopelessly ignorant. "Oh, that's where you're confused. A few months ago, our homeowner association expanded its control to cover this area. The previous owner failed to pay the necessary dues, so the property was taken and put up for bidding. I won the bid, and now this is my home." Francis could barely process what he was listening to. "The previous owner," he repeated. "Lady, I am the previous owner." Karen blinked, then let out a little laugh. Oh, I see what's happening here." She shook her head, as if he were some sad, confused old man. "Mr. Coleman, I don't know what kind of mistake you made, but this land was legally taken by the homeowner association. I paid for it fairly." Francis's blood ran cold. She wasn't just mistaken. She actually believed what she was saying, or more likely she was pretending to believe it, hoping he'd back down. But he wasn't backing down. "I never sold this land," he said, his voice sharp with contained fury. "I own it. I have the deed. I have the records, and I never signed any agreement with an owner association. This is outright theft." Karen's smile wavered for a split second before she recovered. "I think you should take this up with the homeowner association board." Then she said sweetly, but as far as I'm concerned, this is my property now. Francis took a slow, deep breath, trying to keep his anger in check. He had spent years in the military learning how to handle impossible situations without losing his head. He wasn't going to let some smug, overprivileged woman manipulate him into thinking he had lost his own land. I'll be back, he said, his voice deadly calm. And when I do, you'll be the one answering for trespassing. Karen just smirked, unaffected, looking forward to it. Francis turned on his heel and strode back to his truck, his mind racing. He needed to get to the bottom of this fast. If someone had actually managed to forge documents and reclassify his property, this was bigger than just one greedy homeowner association. Karen, this was corruption, and he wasn't about to let them get away with it. Francis drove straight to the county records office, gripping the steering wheel so firmly that his knuckles turned white. The rage simmering in his chest was barely contained, and he had to remind himself repeatedly that losing his temper wouldn't help him get his land back. He needed proof, solid evidence that the homeowner association had illegally taken ownership of his property. If they had managed to get it reclassified under their authority, they had to have filed something with the county. That's where he would start. The county records building was an aging gray structure that had seen better days. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old documents, and the hum of flickering fluorescent lights added an eerie quality to the dimly lit hallways. He approached the clerk at the front desk, a tired-looking man in his 60s with thick glasses resting on the tip of his nose. "Afternoon," Francis said, forcing himself to sound collected. "I need to pull property records for a piece of land I own." The man barely looked up. "What's the parcel number?" Francis hesitated. He hadn't memorized the full parcel number, but he had a copy of his deed in his truck. "Give me 1 second." He rushed outside, yanked open the glove compartment, and pulled out the neatly folded document his grandfather had always told him to keep important papers close, and right now he was grateful for that habit. Back inside, he handed the deed to the clerk. The man took his time unfolding it, adjusting his glasses before squinting at the fine print. After a moment, he let out a small grunt of acknowledgement and typed the details into his terminal. Francis waited in intense silence as the man scrolled through the records. Then suddenly the clerk's eyes widened slightly, his fingers pausing over the keyboard. "What is it?" Francis asked sharply. The clerk frowned. "Well, that's strange." He turned the monitor slightly, revealing a scanned document. "According to this, your land was reclassified under homeowner association jurisdiction. 6 months ago, the property deed was transferred to the homeowner association due to non-payment of required dues." He lifted the detailed display. Francis felt like he had been punched in the gut. "That's impossible. My land was never part of any homeowner association. I've never received a single notice about dues." The clerk rubbed his chin. "I can print the documents for you, but if what you're saying is true, then something's not right here." He clicked a few buttons, and the printer in the corner hummed to life, spitting out several pages. He handed them to Francis, who scanned them quickly, his rage growing. With each line he read, the homeowner association had filed a claim stating that his land had always been within their jurisdiction and that he had failed to pay thousands of dollars in backdated fees. Because of this debt, they had the legal right to seize the property and auction it off. The buyer, Karen Mitchell. Francis clenched his jaw so hard it hurt. This wasn't just a mistake, this was a calculated move to steal his land. "Who signed off on this?" he demanded, flipping to the last page. The clerk adjusted his glasses and leaned closer. "Says here the approval was authorized by the homeowner association board president, a Mr. Todd Hammond." Francis mentally committed the name to memory. "Where can I find him?" The clerk hesitated. "The homeowner association office is on Maple Street. They handle multiple neighborhoods in the area, but if you're planning to go down there, I'd be cautious. These homeowner association groups can be deceptive. They know how to manipulate the system." Francis exhaled slowly. "I appreciate the warning, but I'm Not letting them get away with this, he grabbed the documents, thanked the clerk, and left. His next stop was Maple Street. The homeowner association office was housed in a sleek modern building, a stark contrast to the rural roads Francis was used to. Everything about the place radiated corporate bureaucracy, sterile white walls, minimalist decor, and a receptionist who looked like she had memorized exactly how to be as unhelpful as possible. Francis strode up to the front desk. "I need to speak with Todd Hammond," the receptionist barely glanced at him. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I have legal documents showing that he fraudulently seized my land, so unless you want me to start making noise right here in your lobby, I suggest you get him." She pursed her lips, clearly debating whether it was worth arguing. Then with a sigh, she picked up the phone, murmured something, and hung up. "Mr. Hammond, we'll see you in 5 minutes, third door on the left." Francis didn't thank her. He walked straight down the hallway and pushed open the indicated door without knocking. Inside, Todd Hammond sat behind an expensive-looking desk, flipping through a file. He was a stout man in his 50s with thinning hair and a smug expression that made Francis instantly dislike him. He didn't even look up when Francis entered. "Mr. Coleman," he said as if they were old acquaintances. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Francis threw the documents onto the desk. "Cut the nonsense. You and I both know this land was never under your homeowner association, so how the hell did you get the county to approve this fraud?" Todd finally looked up, his expression completely unbothered. He leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers together. "I assure you, everything was done by the book. Your land fell within the extended zoning of our community development plan due to administrative changes. Properties in that zone were required to comply with homeowner association regulations. When you failed to pay, the necessary steps were taken." Francis laughed bitterly. "You expect me to believe that you reclassified my land without my agreement, fabricated a debt, and sold my property to Karen Mitchell, one of your own homeowner association members? That's not legal. That's theft." Todd sighed as if this conversation was a waste of his time. "If you believe you have a case, you're welcome to challenge it in court, but I should warn you, legal battles against homeowner associations are costly and time-consuming. Are you sure you want to go down that road?" Francis didn't hesitate. "Oh, I'm damn sure, and when I'm done, you'll be the one answering for this scheme." Todd gave him a condescending smile. "I look forward to seeing you try." Francis turned on his heel and left the office, his mind already racing with the next steps. Todd thought he was untouchable, so did Karen, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. Francis left the homeowner association office with his pulse pounding, gripping the fraudulent documents so tightly that the edges crumpled in his fists. He knew what he was dealing with. Now, this wasn't some clerical error or misunderstanding. This was a coordinated land grab. The arrogance in Todd Hammond's voice had made it clear that the homeowner association didn't think he could fight back. They had no idea who they were facing. Francis had spent his career in the military, analyzing threats, gathering intelligence, and countering hostile actions. He wasn't about to let a group of corrupt bureaucrats walk all over him. If they wanted a war, they were going to get one, but first he needed a strategy. Back at his truck, he took out his phone and started making calls. The first was to an old Army buddy, Rick Dawson, who had become a real estate lawyer after leaving the service. "Rick, I need your help," Francis said as soon as he picked up. "I've got a case of property fraud on my hands. The local homeowner association stole my land, falsified documents, and sold it to one of their members. I need to know how to tear them apart legally." Rick let out a low whistle. "Damn, Francis, you don't do things halfway. Do you send me everything you've got? I'll look into it, but cases like these can be complicated. Homeowner associations know how to work this system. You need more than just proof of fraud. You need leverage." Leverage, that word stuck in Francis's mind long after he hung up the phone. If Todd Hammond and his corrupt homeowner association board thought they were invincible, then they had secrets. It was just a matter of finding them. Francis didn't go straight home. Instead, he drove back to town, parking a few blocks away from the homeowner association office. He wasn't about to walk back through the front door again. Not yet. Instead, he found a quiet spot in a nearby cafe with a clear view of the building and started observing. It didn't take long to see that Todd wasn't working alone. Over the next few hours, Francis watched as different people came and went, most of them carrying files or meeting behind closed doors. He made note of every face, every name, plate he could catch. The more he knew about the players involved, the better. By evening, he had gathered enough to start assembling things together. There were at least three key people in Todd's inner circle: his assistant, a woman named Cheryl, a property developer named Blake Vaugh, who seemed to be in and out of the office far too frequently, and a man in a suit who arrived in an expensive black sedan and left without a word. Francis didn't know who he was yet, but he intended to find out. He took the next step by diving into public records. The county's database was a goldmine of information, and with a little digging, Francis started connecting the dots. It wasn't just his land that had been absorbed into the homeowner association over the past 2 years. The association had systematically reclassified multiple rural properties, all under the same excuse: zone changes and mandatory compliance. Each time the land was transferred to the homeowner association, the owners were hit with fraudulent debt claims, and when they couldn't pay, their properties were auctioned off to members of the homeowner association's board or their close associates. Francis's stomach turned as he scrolled through the list of stolen properties: farmers, retirees, people who had lived on their land for decades, now forced out because they either didn't know how to fight back or didn't have the resources to do it. This was bigger than he had thought, and he wasn't going to be their next victim. Francis needed first-hand accounts. He tracked down the contact information of a man named Henry Lawson, a 72-year-old farmer who had lost his land in the same way. When Francis called, Henry was hesitant at first, but as soon as he realized he wasn't alone, his frustration spilled out. "They took my family's farm," Henry said, his voice trembling with anger. Said, "I owed them $30,000 in back dues, $30,000 I don't even live in their damn neighborhood. When I fought it, they drained me dry with legal fees. I lost everything." "Henry, do you have any paperwork from your case, emails, letters, anything that proves what they did to you?" "Yeah," Henry said bitterly. "Not that it did me any good. It will now," Francis promised. "I'm putting together a case, and I need as much evidence as I can get. If we can prove a pattern of fraud, we can take them down." Henry agreed to send over everything he had. Over the next 2 days, Francis gathered more victims: a couple who had lost their home after a sudden mandatory renovation fee put them into debt, a widower who had been forced to sell when the homeowner association placed a lien on his house for landscaping violations that didn't exist. The list kept growing, and with every new name, Francis's determination strengthened. Now he had what he needed: evidence of systematic corruption, proof that the homeowner association had been running an illegal land-grabbing operation for years. It was time to make a move. He reached out to a local investigative journalist, a woman named Nina Moreno, who had a reputation for exposing corruption in small-town politics. When he laid out what he had, she immediately saw the potential. "This is huge," Nina said. "If what you're telling me is true, this isn't just fraud, it's racketeering. It could bring down the whole homeowner association." "That's the goal," Francis said grimly. "I want these people exposed." Nina agreed to start researching on her end, but she warned Francis to be cautious. "People like this don't go down easily. If they feel trapped, they'll fight back." Francis already knew that, but he wasn't afraid. The fight was just beginning. Francis didn't sleep much after speaking with Nina. His mind was working too fast, piecing together his next strategy. He had gathered evidence, spoken to other victims, and revealed a clear pattern of fraud. But now came the real challenge: forcing the homeowner association to answer for its legal battles were slow, and Francis didn't have the luxury of time. The homeowner association had stolen his land, and he had no doubt that Todd Hammond and his group were already preparing to counter any attempt to take it back. If Francis waited too long, they could create more paperwork, cover their tracks, or overwhelm him in legal fees. No, he needed to apply pressure now, and he needed to do it in a way they wouldn't see coming. The first step was ensuring the story spread. Nina had already begun drafting her expose, but Francis wanted more than just an article. He wanted a spectacle. He called Rick Dawson, his lawyer friend, early the next morning. "I need you to draft a cease and desist order against the homeowner association demanding immediate return of my land." and stopping all sales or development on other seized properties, he said. Without hesitation, Rick let out a low whistle. Going straight for the attack. Huh, if we wait, they'll bury us in paperwork, Francis said. I want them on defense before they even know what's happening. Rick agreed, promising to have the document ready within hours. While Rick handled the legal side, Francis focused on mobilizing the community. He reached out to every victim he had spoken with and urged them to gather at the town hall that evening. We need numbers, he told Henry Lawson. If the homeowner association thinks they can intimidate us one by one, we have to show them that they're wrong. Henry agreed, and by noon, word had spread. Dozens of people, landowners displaced, families angry, homeowners committed to showing up. Some were hesitant, afraid of retaliation, but Francis assured them they win if we stay silent. We take our land back if we fight together. That night, the town hall was packed. The air was thick with tension, anger, and anticipation. Francis stood at the front looking over the faces of people who had been wronged, just like he had. Nina Moreno had brought a cameraman already recording footage for her report. Rick had arrived with freshly printed legal documents, and to Francis's grim satisfaction, even Todd Hammond and a few members of the homeowner association board had shown up, likely expecting to control the narrative. Francis didn't give them the chance. This stops today, he said, his voice carrying through the hall. For years, this homeowner association has been stealing property under the guise of legal compliance. They forced people from their homes, seized land they had no right to take, and used their power to enrich themselves. Murmurs and shouts of agreement rippled through the crowd. Francis held up the documents. This is proof they've done this before, and now they think they can take my land too, but they made a mistake. They targeted the wrong man. Nina stepped forward, addressing the crowd. The homeowner association doesn't want you to know this, but what they're doing isn't just unethical, it's criminal. With the evidence we have, this could qualify as racketeering, which carries federal charges. If we push this hard enough people in, that homeowner association could go to prison. The room erupted. People started shouting questions, demanding action. Todd Hammond finally stood, raising his hands in mock surrender. Now, let's all calm down. These accusations are baseless. The homeowner association operates fully within legal parameters. Francis turned to face him, his jaw tight. Explain this. Then he held up a set of county records showing fraudulent land transfers. Explain how people who never signed homeowner association agreements suddenly found themselves in debt to your association. Explain how every seized property just happened to be auctioned off to board members or their associates. Todd's smug expression faltered. If you have concerns, I encourage you to go through the proper legal channels. That's exactly what we're doing. Francis cut him off. He turned to the audience. We're filing a class action lawsuit, not just me, all of us, every person this homeowner association has stolen from, and we're demanding not only our land back, but full compensation. More cheers erupted. Todd's face turned red. Nina stepped forward again. And if that weren't enough, we're taking this story national. I have media contacts in major outlets who would love to expose corruption like this. The homeowner association has gotten away with this because people were too afraid to speak up, but not anymore. Todd looked like he was about to explode. The other homeowner association board members whispered furiously among themselves. Francis knew they were trapped. If you fight this, Francis said, staring directly at Todd, you're going to lose more than just money. You'll lose your power, your reputation, maybe even your freedom.
Silence stretched across the hall. Then, unexpectedly, Todd scoffed. He crossed his arms, his confidence returning. You think you can beat us? He laughed. We have the best lawyers money can buy. We have connections in local government. You're just a bunch of angry homeowners. You really think you can take us down? Francis smiled coldly. Watch me. And with that, the real fight began. The days following the town hall meeting were a whirlwind of legal filings, media coverage, and mounting pressure on the corrupt homeowner association board. Francis barely had time to breathe between meetings with his lawyer, interviews with reporters, and rallying the growing number of homeowners who had joined the fight. Nina Moreno's expose hit the news cycle like a bombshell. What started as a local scandal quickly gained traction on social media, and soon national outlets were picking up the story. Homeowners revolt against corrupt homeowner association. became a trending topic, and investigative journalists from larger networks began reaching out to Francis eager to dig deeper into the fraudulent practices Todd Hammond and his board had been running. With the lawsuit officially filed, the pressure on the homeowner association intensified. Francis knew they were scrambling. Todd had gone silent, no longer responding to media inquiries, and several board members had resigned abruptly, likely trying to distance themselves from the scandal. But Francis wasn't satisfied with just forcing them out. He wanted justice. He wanted to make sure this never happened to anyone else again. Rick had been working around the clock, coordinating with other attorneys representing displaced homeowners. The evidence is overwhelming, he told Francis over the phone. Fraudulent land transfers, fabricated debt claims, even clear indications of bribery within the local zoning office. If the county officials don't act, we have enough to push for a federal investigation. That was exactly what Francis wanted. He had suspected from the beginning that the homeowner association wasn't acting alone. There were too many convenient loopholes, too many approvals that should have never happened. Someone in the county government had been complicit, signing off on these fraudulent transfers, and now, with the media spotlight burning down on them, they had nowhere to hide them. The first major crack appeared. Francis was at home sifting through more documents when his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. "This is Francis Coleman." He answered. A nervous voice came through the line. "Mr. Coleman, my name is Daniel Wills. I used to work for the county zoning office. I have information you need." Francis sat up straight. "Go on." There was a pause, then a deep breath. "I was told to approve the homeowner association's land reclassifications. We all were, but we knew they were fraudulent. We were just following orders." Francis gritted his teeth. "Who orders Todd Hammond?" Wills admitted, but he wasn't working alone. He had people inside the county pushing the paperwork through, and he paid off inspectors to ignore building violations. "I have email signed documents and payment records to prove it. I kept them as insurance in case this all came back one day." Francis felt a surge of triumph. This was it, the missing link. "You're willing to testify?" A long silence, then a shaky yes. "But I need protection. If I go public, I could lose my job. Maybe worse. I'll make sure you're safe." Francis promised. "Get me those documents." Hours later, he met Wills in person. The man was pale, fidgety, clearly terrified, but he handed Francis a thick envelope filled with damning evidence: internal memos, payment transfers from the homeowner association, county officials, even an email chain where Todd had blatantly instructed his contacts to fast-track a fraudulent property seizure. Francis wasted no time. He forwarded everything to Nina and Rick. Within hours, Nina had published an updated story, this time directly implicating not just the homeowner association, but members of the county government itself. And Ricky made sure the evidence reached federal authorities. The next morning, the FBI showed up at the homeowner association office. Francis arrived just in time to see agents hauling out boxes of files, computers, and hard drives. Several employees were being questioned on the spot, while Todd Hammond himself stood outside looking pale and defeated. When he spotted Francis, his face twisted in rage. "This is your doing." Todd spat, stepping toward him. "You think you've won?" Francis didn't flinch. "I know I have." Todd shook his head. "You don't understand how this works. People like me don't go down over something like this. I have connections. I have fraud charges." Francis interrupted. "Money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy. You think your connections can save you from federal prison?" Todd's face drained of color. He opened his mouth to argue, but at that moment, two FBI agents approached. "Mr. Hammond," one of them said, "you're under arrest." Francis watched as Todd was handcuffed and led to a waiting car. For a long moment, he just stood there, taking in the sight. The man who had stolen his land, stolen so many people's land, was finally facing justice. The homeowner association board crumbled in the following weeks. Members resigned in disgrace. The county officials involved in the fraud were fired and placed under investigation, and most importantly, every homeowner who had lost their property had it restored. Francis stood on his land, looking out at the place he had fought so hard to reclaim. It had been a long battle, but he had won, not just for himself, but for every person who had been wronged. And as he watched a bulldozer tear down the illegal mansion that had been built on his soil, he allowed himself a satisfied smile. Justice had been served.